Season 5 of the Outlast Trials was a blast. We were introduced to Liliya Bogomolova during that season, and she was extremely menacing. But now we're into Season 6, and we have some sweet new lore to look at today. First of all though, massive thanks to Red Barrels for sponsoring this video. The Outlast Trials Project Judas update is live now, so go and jump into the new Otto and Aurora trial environment, the TV studio, as well as the new game mode Scavenger, in which you enter the trials without your trusty ESOP unit, prescriptions and amps, and gather up components off of dead reagents whilst injured. It's currently in its first phase, with Part 2 launching on April 7th. There's also a new MK Challenge 2 called Solve the Murder, set in Liliya's resort environment. A lot of people who watch these videos regularly have said that they had inspired them to buy the Outlast Trials and play it for themselves. If you're someone who doesn't own the game yet, in the description below you can find my link to it for whatever platform you want to play it on, and the great thing about Outlast Trials is that it supports crossplay, so you can try and outlast the trials alongside your friends. Anyway, as we go through the new lore documents, there will be spoilers in this video for the whole Outlast franchise. It's just safer to say that, so please be aware going any further. But that's enough of an intro, let's jump in. Okay, so even though we left off in 1961 in Season 5, to kick this off we need to go back to 1960, back when Otto and Aurora Kress were brought to Sinyala. Murkoff wanted to introduce a political program at Sinyala because the US presidential election between the Democratic candidate John F. Kennedy and Republican candidate Richard Nixon was heating up, and one key thing was making this election different to previous ones: television. As explained in other updates, Kennedy and Nixon held a debate which was to be broadcast live on television. This led to many believing this would change the course of politics forever, as they believed politicians would become mere products. And they were right, as Kennedy, with his perfect hair and sharp suit, was deemed by many who watched him on the debate to have performed better than Nixon. Easterman saw this coming and he wants to get a jump start on this political shift. In previous updates I spoke about how Otto was very gifted when it came to politics. Aurora was, on the other hand, an incredibly gifted chemist. Using Otto's gifts of persuasion, along with Aurora's newly concocted Kress precursor, which was formulated to open up the mind for suggestion, reagents would be brainwashed, and this was quite effective. We'd learned from a Murkoff account comic that Otto would help politicians with their political campaigns and was very successful. On the 17th of October 1960, Murkoff higher-up Alice Avellanos is speaking with the Sinyala architect Moses Scarfiotti about the television proposal, and that the board loved the idea, as 90% of Americans now own a television set. Avellanos calls it a direct route into the minds of America. It's a game changer. So the Murkoff board would authorize construction of a brand new trial environment, a TV studio, and the trial will involve a well-groomed and presenter called Bob Vania. Of course, underneath the mask is a poor victim, someone deemed surplus to Murkoff's requirements. Bob is being presented as a polished idol of the masses, and this is hammering home the impact of the media on politics. Reagents are to sabotage the broadcasts and humiliate and destroy this idol. Anyway, a few days after Avellanos' chat with Scarfiotti, Scarfiotti is speaking with Easterman, and he expresses his surprise that Phyllis Futterman, Mother Gooseberry, wasn't chosen for this particular trial, given her previous experiences in hosting children's TV shows prior to her arrest. Easterman says that they need a more subtle effect, and this comes in the very grotesque form of Otto and Aurora Kress. The subject then turns to one of Easterman's favourite subjects, and that is charisma. Easterman believes, and has done so for a long time, that some of the world's most influential, and by and large some of the most heinous individuals throughout history, all had one thing in common, and that is charisma. They speak about Kennedy, and Scarfiotti calls him very charismatic, and this angers Easterman as this is a manufactured charisma. He merely seems charismatic because he's on television, and he says that Avellanos has seen Kennedy speak live and he's not that impressive, just an unremarkable man addicted to painkillers. And Easterman calls him hollow. He says that if you can put two people on television, empty puppets, calling them Hitler and anti-Hitler, you get the opportunity to control both sides, controlling the whole circus, as he so eloquently puts it. Scarfiotti realizes that Easterman is basically talking about making politicians. Speaking about the TV studio environment, Easterman states that if reagents believe the news is objective fact, then they'll come to trust the opinion delivered by the presenter is also fact too. The manipulation from backstage comes from Otto and Aurora Kress. Let's talk about Liliya for a minute. Most of you will remember that the Liliya programs were part of a collaboration between Mount Massive Hospital, it was called this before Murkoff's charitable outreach program took it over in 2009 and turned it into an insane asylum. From the moment we met Liliya back in Season 5, it was clear that she had a certain effect on people in close proximity to her. She could even convince people to mutilate themselves in service to her. A dangerous type of charisma indeed, so naturally she caught Dr. Easterman's eye. Easterman himself, upon interviewing her, noted that she did not say a word, but that when near to her he'd feel a deep itch inside his ear canal, and words were being spoken, but they were mere gibberish. Reagents, however, could hear these words pretty clearly. We'll come back to that. The guy at Mount Massive who was overseeing the collab between Sinyala and Mount Massive was a guy named Silas Knisley, a pretty strange guy himself, who seems to have a small fixation on Alice Avianos. Anyway, he's having a chat with Easterman on the 4th of March 1961, and he sees a book with the title The Mechanical Bride. Having seen how Liliya is portrayed within Sinyala as a type of mechanical mannequin, Knisley incorrectly assumes the book is about her. Easterman tells him, and this links into Sinyala's television program, that the book is about the way the media creates adverts which, according to the book's author, Marshall McLuhan, aim to get inside the collective public mind of those the adverts present themselves to. The conversation quickly moves on to Liliya. Easterman asks Knisley if he's there to pass on information to Dr. Rudolf Wernicke regarding Liliya. Then as a girl walks in with the coffee, Knisley's gaze is immediately drawn to a piece of Shungu art, which is erotic art from the Orient, originating from the Edo period. Knisley can barely take his eyes off it, almost as if Easterman is fully aware of what could be Knisley's weakness, lust and women. Now bear in mind this is only 6 minutes into their meeting. Sometime later, around 30 minutes in, they speak about Wernicke and whether or not anyone can really call themselves an ex-Nazi. Knisley, who by this point has had a bit too much to drink, and after being spiked by Easterman, spills stuff about Wernicke. They chat about butterflies that bite your nipples and drink blood. A document mentioning something similar was found in Mount Massive Asylum by Miles Upshur in 2013, in which it mentioned creatures from folklore that did this. Wernicke filled the head of Billy Hope with these kinds of tales from German folklore, and you'll remember that Billy Hope was the first Mount Massive patient that was compatible with the morphogenic engine, which at the time of trials is being developed by Wernicke, and that Billy was able to control a swarm of nanomachines which formed an entity called the Walrider. In this Outlast 1 document, it mentions that these butterflies are the only thing that can kill the Walrider. But back to the conversation. Knisley says that Wernicke does not care at all about Liliya. He's much more interested in what's happening to the reagents around her. He mentions the egregore, the collective consciousness, and something happens in this meeting after Easterman appears to have flipped out upon hearing this. Most likely because he's heard it before, way back in January 1960, a little over a year ago, when a reagent was found carving the word egregore into a corpse inside a trial environment. It seems that Knisley passed out in Easterman's office and is sleeping off whatever state he's in the infirmary. Easterman is surprised at just how easy it was to get Knisley to talk. Knisley told Easterman that Wernicke thinks Liliya will create a collective consciousness amongst the reagents. He refuses to believe it, referring to Dr. Wernicke as a Jungian, and this entire theory as spiritual communism. But this is something that has been stirring for a long time, ever since Amelia was able to begin her revolt, and started to give the reagents hope, leading to the mass escape that she had manufactured. Many did in fact escape into the desert wilderness surrounding Sinyala, but Amelia was not able to escape. She was caught and then kept on the Catatonia wards. Eastman would regularly sit at Amelia's bedside wondering what she was dreaming about. He writes that the reagents were primed to seek a messiah-type figure, and when Amelia was captured, the reagents had a void left where Amelia was. When Liliya was brought to Sinyala, I believe this didn't just replace Amelia, it amplified the collective consciousness. Easterman points to the revision therapy in which reagents would burn away illusions of an escape and false hope, therefore allowing Liliya to be the tool he was intended to be. But I don't think Easterman really gets just how much of a problem this could potentially become for him. Even Avianos thinks that Easterman is starting to lose control of the therapy. Fast forward now to the end of March, as on the 24th of March 1961, Easterman and Avianos are talking about someone. They're talking about Ahmad bin Yahya Hamid ad-Din, one of the last kings of Yemen, as well as the Imam. He was despotic and ruled for 14 years. A controversial ruler, this resulted in many assassination attempts. But in Avianos and Easterman's conversation, they talk about the fact that whilst assets, reagents were in Yemen, they weren't the ones responsible for this latest attempt, as it was thought that Yemeni rebels were the ones responsible. Avianos states that the Murkoff board see this as a gap in their services. She describes this as flexible assets that are effective against other agents, as currently the reagents are not effective when it comes to this. Easterman responds that this is what they designed invasion therapy for, but Avianos and the board think they need to go further. Easterman says he has an idea. Let's watch this space, I guess. At the end of Season 2, Emilia, who had managed to escape a trial environment, had managed to manufacture a mass escape from Sinyala, as mentioned earlier. Easterman had become frustrated at the reagent still seeing her as some sort of leader, and we can now see Easterman's frustrations becoming too much. On the 17th of February 1961, Easterman speaks of Emilia distracting him, of her lingering in the reagent's imaginations. They tried hanging her in the sleep room in order to demonstrate how hopeless she was, but this didn't have the effect they were hoping for. He speaks of reagents having to choose change for themselves. Eastman writes that the reagents have to destroy Emilia, so he devised a plan, a very sneaky one. On reagents using the sleep room terminal, as with what happened in the first escape attempt, Emilia pops upon the screen telling the reagents they have another opportunity. That she's managed to divert the chum bucket down to the biohazard disposal area again, and the reagent gets down there and strangely hears the voice of Easterman and finds two of Emilia's co-conspirators that they have to burn alive, and they then also have to burn and kill Emilia. Doing so and running for the exit, it's revealed to be a trick, to give the reagent false hope. There is no escape, of course, as the staff at Sinyala sealed off any exits, but the reagent makes it back to the sleep room despite being pursued by both Henrietta Grubbs, the Jaeger, and a prime asset. So, is Emilia really dead? Maybe. Hell, Emilia may not be dead, as we never saw her face. Easterman could be keeping her alive and only making the reagents think that she is gone. Interestingly, results from the revision therapy are to be kept within Sinyala and are not to be shared with Mount Massive, Los Alamos, or the agency, and any inquiries from these externals should be reported to Easterman himself. On the 10th of April 1961, Avianos and Murkoff's CIA liaison Jameson Lawler, who have both had a secret romance going on for quite some time, are talking about something that's about to go down in Cuba. As a lot of you will know, the USA's relations with Cuba were awful. Essentially, back in 1959 on New Year's Day, the US-backed leader of Cuba, Fulgencio Batista, was overthrown by Cuban revolutionaries led by Fidel Castro, who turned Cuba into a socialist state under communist rule. He had survived many assassination attempts, but important to this story thread is that Cuban people in opposition to Castro fled Cuba, becoming Cuban exiles. So the CIA planned to utilize the Cuban exiles as counter-revolutionaries and invade Cuba in order to overthrow Castro. Around 15 minutes into Lawler and Avianos' conversation, Lawler states that the Soviets know the invasion is going to happen. Now, bear in mind that Kennedy is now the president, but the information that the Soviets are in fact aware of the invasion of Cuba, well, the CIA have decided to keep that information from Kennedy and to proceed as planned anyway. Basically, Lawler says they don't need Murkoff assets on this one, that they're pulling out the reagents from Cuba, but says that their contract with Murkoff will be paid out anyway. Lawler seems to suggest that the leak that made its way to the Soviets came from within Murkoff, and he's heard that they've got a Soviet asset on site. Avianos responds that Murkoff have more invested in Cuba than just an agency contract. Then, as history tells us, the Bay of Pigs invasion failed, as Castro's men were able to encircle the Cuban counter-revolutionaries. On the 20th of April 1961, Avianos writes a barbed letter to Lawler, gloating about the fact that the invasion failed. She tells the agency to keep an eye on Algeria and to give them a call if they need anything. She's referring to things happening during the Algerian War, which had been going on since the year 1954. Essentially, a military revolt was to take place by disgruntled, rebellious paratroopers who had taken control of Algiers, as it was known then, and the idea was to invade France to pressure the then French Premier Charles de Gaulle not to abandon French Algeria. De Gaulle's intention was to abandon French Algeria because the war and conflict in the country was becoming a significant drain on France's economy, so he'd begun negotiations with a group called the FLN, the French acronym for the National Liberation Front. The Muslim nationalists wanted independence, and the European settlers wanted Algiers to remain part of France. In January 1961, a vote had been held in France and around 80% voted in favour of Algerian independence, since many people had lost loved ones after they'd been conscripted into the French military. So it's no real surprise that the vote went the way it did. Then came the revolt, on April 21st, 1961. It failed though, barely getting off the ground, but it remains to be seen how this affects relations between the agency and Murkoff going forward, and what it has to do with Murkoff. One interesting thing to finish on is something that we've been seeing for a long time, ever since Season 1 in fact, as that is Avianos' concern that Easterman is losing control. She's expressing concern to someone on the phone that he's taking too many unnecessary risks, and in front of her is Easterman's psych report from HR. Interesting to see how this one develops. But that's it for this lore roundup for the Outlast Trials. I do hope you enjoyed this one. Remember, if you haven't got this game, then follow my link down in the description and play it for yourself. Again, a big thank you to Red Barrels for sponsoring this video. If you're new here, then please leave a like and subscribe if you aren't already. Comment your thoughts below, but for now, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.